Today, I carry a name that wasn't born with me. I live in a distant land, where no one knows my story, and where the past seems like a dream, muffled by the dust of time. But there was a time when my name carried weight, not because of me, but because of the man who bore it with honor. My father, the most respected Imam in a district of Riyadh, was a near mythical figure, and I was his daughter, his little Samira. I was born when the desert heat still seemed to bring blessing, not punishment. Our home was simple, with white walls and cool shadows, just steps from the mosque where my father led prayers 5 times a day. His voice, strong and commanding, pierced my bedroom windows every morning before sunrise. I woke to his chants, not just because he spoke to God, but because it seemed God heard him before all of us. My childhood was marked by the scent of incense, pages of sacred books, and a silence that screamed louder than any child's play. By the age of 7, I already knew verses I didn't understand by heart, reciting them perfectly to please and impress. My father would show me off to others like a trophy. "This is my daughter," he would say, with a pride that was more about him than me. He called me a blessing, but I never knew if he meant it or if I was just a reflection of the perfect daughter he needed to present to the world. On Fridays, I hid behind a carved screen, listening to the sermons he preached with authority. He spoke of God's wrath with such certainty that even before I understood it all, I was already afraid. I didn't know then that those words would one day be like arrows to my own heart. Back then, I was still just a little girl who helped her mother in the kitchen, memorized verses, and believed that following the rules was the way to be loved. The city was my entire world, its wide streets, the cold marble of the shopping malls, the unchanging silence of the nights. Nothing changed, and no one dared to seek change. It was as if everything were sealed, written in stone. My mother was a gentle, almost invisible presence. She spoke little, but her hands taught me much. I learned from her how to pour tea just right, how to walk discreetly, how to lower my eyes when a man spoke. But I never knew if she was happy. Her eyes were like clouded mirrors. You saw her reflection, but never what she truly felt. Our life, on the outside, was admired. We had a beautiful house, an indoor garden where jasmines bloomed even in the merciless heat, and a chauffeur-driven car that took us wherever we needed to go. Wherever my father went, people bowed, and I walked 2 steps behind him. Always. It was an honor, yes, but it was also a chain. On days when the heat seemed to bend the ground, I would escape to the coolest place in the house, my father's library. There, among leather-bound books with gilded letters, I found something he could never control: poetry. Ancient verses, full of emotion and beauty, transported me to worlds where people wept, loved, and made mistakes. Worlds where I could be more than just the Imam's daughter. I didn't know it yet, but God was already there. Even in that prison of rituals and rules, He saw me, and it was there, amidst the words of poets who spoke of the soul, that mine began to awaken. And that was just the beginning of my journey, one that would take me far from everything I knew, to finally find the one who had known me since birth. But even in the books I loved so much, there was a limit, a kind of silence disguised as poetry. The pages overflowed with pent-up feelings, questions too beautiful to be answered. And there, sitting on the cold mosaic floor, legs crossed and hair tied back, I found myself wondering, would my whole life be like this, beautiful on the outside, and empty on the inside? While other girls my age began to dream of, or accept, marriages with cousins or sons of well-placed men, a single question burned inside me, and I never dared say it out loud. If God is so powerful, why does He need to be feared? I clearly remember an ordinary afternoon that became a turning point. I was sitting in the courtyard of our house, in the shade of an old orange tree my grandfather had planted. I watched the ants go about their business, carrying pieces of bread along a perfectly laid path, one after the other. There was no doubt, no hesitation. They obeyed, simply because that was what was done. And I thought, are we any different from them? Is living just about going on without questioning? That same night, after dinner, the sound of my mother's dishes being washed still echoed in the kitchen, and my father read quietly in his study. The yellowish light from the lamp cast long shadows on the wall. I summoned all the courage I could muster and approached the half-open door. In a trembling, almost whispering voice, I asked, "Father, does God love us?" He looked up from his book, surprised. For a second I saw something strange in his face, as if the question had touched a forgotten place inside him. But it was short-lived. Soon his expression hardened. God loves those who obey. That's all you need to know. And he went back to reading, ending the conversation with the same firmness with which he ended his sermons. I went upstairs to my room with a tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, counting cracks in the plaster while the city slept, as it always did, enveloped in a silence that no one dared break. At that moment, something inside me broke, or perhaps it was there that it began to awaken. I would only understand this later. But that simple, unanswered question was the first crack in the invisible wall surrounding my life. 2 years passed. I entered King Saud University to study Arabic literature, and it was there, in that place that seemed like just another extension of my family obligation, that the wall began to crumble once and for all. I discovered that there are questions that, once asked, never shut up, and walls that, even though they appear solid, have always been fragile on the inside. The university stood like an oasis in the desert of my certainties. It was September 2019. When I walked through those glass and steel doors for the first time, I felt as if I were breathing a different kind of air, a lighter, more real air. My father only allowed me to study on one condition. The family driver would take me and pick me up every day, without exception. Education is important, but reputation is even more so, he said. I nodded without question. I thought I was simply obeying. Little did I know that such controlled permission would be the very breach through which freedom would begin to enter. The first few weeks were predictable. I followed the routine, sat at the front of the class, and got good grades. But something had changed. I couldn't see the world the same way anymore. God remained silent, but for the first time, I began to truly seek that silence. Classes continued at a steady pace. Classical poetry, analysis of ancient texts, discussions of Al-Jahiz and Ibn Khaldun. I took careful notes, asked questions only when necessary, and returned home each day with my books tucked under my arm and the same silence clinging to me like a second skin. But there was something about that place, something I couldn't name, but I felt it. It was as if the world suddenly had more windows than doors. I saw people laughing loudly, asking questions without fear of being punished for their answers, and that made me uneasy, not because of the boldness of others, but because of the lack of freedom it exposed in me. It was in the 3rd week of classes that I first saw her. Her name was Yasmin Cruz, from Manila, Philippines. There was something about her that couldn't be immediately explained. Perhaps it was the calm way she occupied her space, like someone who had learned to find peace even in places where she wasn't welcome. She was studying nursing on an exchange program, but through an administrative error that only God could have orchestrated, she ended up enrolled in the same elective course in comparative literature that I had chosen. At first, we barely exchanged words beyond a polite, hello. I was trained, not only by culture but by life, to keep my distance. But Yasmin had a curious way of approaching, unhurriedly, without intruding. She asked questions with genuine interest, not to gather information, but like someone planting seeds unsure of the fertile soil. One afternoon, as we waited for class to start, she glanced at the book in my hands, an old edition of The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, which I had found in my father's library. Do you like The Prophet? He asked, with a genuine gleam in his eyes. I like the way he talks about love, I replied, surprised that I had said something so personal out loud. She smiled, a calm, almost familiar smile. There is a God who loves like this, she said softly, almost as if she were telling me a secret, without asking for anything in return. A love without conditions. I remained silent. That sentence hovered between us, like a feather too light to touch the ground. It was too beautiful to be true. To me, God was just, but severe. He demanded obedience, fear, sacrifice, love, only after approval. And yet, something inside me trembled. In the weeks that followed, we began having lunch together. We never discussed religion directly. There was no need. We talked about books, childhood, our cities. She told me about Manila, the bustling streets, the smell of the sea, a freedom that was almost palpable. And I, for the first time, began to talk about myself, about Riyadh, about how growing up in such a devout home could sometimes feel like a glass castle, beautiful on the outside, but with walls that were too thin on the inside. Her presence intrigued me. There was a light that wasn't hers, but seemed to come from within. It was like being near a fireplace on a cold day. You don't understand how, but just being there warms you up. Then, one October afternoon, as we were leaving the university together, She stopped suddenly. She pulled from her backpack a small blue package, the same shade as the sky just before sunset. "Samira," he said, with a care that disarmed me. "I want to give you this. You don't have to read it. Don't feel pressured. But if you ever feel lost, or if you're looking for answers no one has given you, maybe you'll find something here." She didn't push me at all. She just placed the package in my hands like someone offering water in the desert, and we continued walking in silence. At that moment, I didn't know it yet, but that blue cloth held more than a gift. It was a door and a promise. I took the package with trembling hands. It was light, almost weightless, and yet, at the same time, it seemed to carry something dense, as if the blue fabric held a secret too ancient to speak aloud. Yasmin didn't explain anything. She simply touched my arm with a gentle gesture, as if to say, "I'm with you," without needing words, and walked away, leaving me alone in the hallway, my heart racing and that package burning between my fingers. I waited until silence filled the house. My father was already snoring in the next room, and the light in my mother's room had been out for hours. Riyadh was asleep, that artificial calm of a city that has learned to smother doubts with tradition. I sat on the floor of my room, leaning against the closed door, my heart beating like a drum. I unwrapped the blue cloth carefully, as if it might burst into sound at any moment. And there it was, the simple cover, the text in Arabic, Gospel, the Gospel. My first reaction was panic. I wanted to hide it, get rid of it, pretend I'd never touched it. I knew what it meant to hold that book, especially as the daughter of an Imam. In our culture, this wasn't just a mistake, it was betrayal. An irreparable shame. But against all instinct, I opened the first page. The words leaped before my eyes as if they were something my soul already knew, but had forgotten. I didn't understand everything, but something there spoke directly to me. The sentences didn't shout, didn't threaten. They were like a gentle whisper entering the cracks of fear. I read for an hour, then for 2. When I got to chapter 5 of the Gospel of Matthew, I found a sentence that broke me. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I closed the book. The tears came without warning, hot, silent. I didn't cry out of fear. I cried because for the first time, I realized how tired I was. Tired of carrying a weight that never belonged to me. Tired of being perfect. Of obeying out of obligation. Of seeking approval without ever feeling love. And there he was, Jesus. A stranger, a forbidden name, telling me that I could simply come, tired, imperfect, broken, and that I would still be welcomed, not with judgment, with rest. That night, I hid the gospel under my college books, wrapped again in the blue cloth, but something had already changed. The crack in the glass of my life, once invisible, was now clear, and every night, that crack grew wider. I developed a secret routine. After dinner, after family prayers, after every precisely whispered "God is great," I would lock myself in my room. I would turn off the lights, hide under the covers, and by the light of my phone, read a few more pages. And the more I read, the more I saw. Jesus spoke of a kingdom that was not about control, but about freedom. He spoke of forgiving without measure. It spoke of a shepherd who left 99 sheep just to go and get one, the one that was lost. And there, lying in the dark, my heart torn between what I had been taught and what I was discovering, I knew I was that sheep, and someone was coming after me all along. But along with hope, fear grew, because this truth was changing me inside, and I knew that real change doesn't stay hidden forever. Weeks turned into months, and my life split into 2 worlds. During the day, I was the Imam's exemplary daughter, a follower of traditions, always punctual, always correct. At night, I was different, a silent seeker, reading forbidden words while the world around me slept, oblivious to the revolution taking place within me. And for the first time, this revolution didn't feel wrong. It felt true. Night after night, I repeated the same ritual. I waited until I heard my father's footsteps crossing the hallway after the last prayer of the day. I knew by heart every creak of the floor, every pattern of the silence that fell when the house finally fell asleep. I counted to 100, as if praying a litany, and then I moved with the precision of someone who has learned to make no sound, not even with their breathing. I dug the gospel from where I'd hidden it, between the pages of a huge ancient Arabic dictionary, the kind no one opened anymore, not even out of curiosity. Yasmin's blue cloth now wrapped the book, along with an extra layer of plastic, to block even the whisper of a sound. I hid under the covers like a child hiding with a flashlight, but what I read there wasn't a fairy tale. They were words that found me, living words. Each night seemed written just for me. I was reading about a man named Nicodemus who sought Jesus in secret, in the darkness, because daylight was too fraught with danger. And I thought, I am he. It is in the darkness that I have the courage to be truthful. It was there, in the shadows of my room, that I saw that my questions were not blasphemy. They were thirst. Then I read about the Samaritan woman, despised by everyone, but to whom Jesus offered something no one else could, living water, a thirst quenched not by religion, but by presence. And I knew that thirst. I'd lived with it in my heart for as long as I can remember. I read about Peter, the same one who denied Jesus 3 times out of fear, and yet he was forgiven, restored. I don't know how to explain what I felt at that moment, but I began to wonder, if one day I have to choose between my family and this truth, would I deny it too, or would I have the courage? The change in me didn't come like a bolt of lightning. It was like a light rain, constant, almost imperceptible, but which wets everything over time. My prayers, once cold and memorized, began to become real conversations. I spoke to God, not the distant God of sermons, but the God Jesus called Father. I told him my fears. I confessed my guilt for hiding what I loved most. But strangely, in that hiding place, I felt something I had never felt within the mosque walls. Closeness. It was as if God wasn't watching me from afar, but right there with me, under the covers, listening to every word. But this closeness to the divine began to distance me from the human world around me. My father's words, once sacred and indisputable, now sounded hollow, cold. They no longer echoed in my heart. And the conversations at the table, it all felt like a theater, each person acting out the role they'd learned, lacking the courage to tear up the script. It was my mother who noticed first. We were in the kitchen, preparing for dinner. I was cutting tomatoes. She was chopping onions, and the scent of spices filled the air with a certain familiar comfort. Suddenly she stopped. She stared at me for a moment too long. "Are you okay, Samira? You've been different." My heart raced. Had I left the gospel in plain sight? Had I been careless? Did she know? I tried to smile, keeping my voice steady. "It's just exam stress, Mom. I'm fine." She nodded slowly, returning to her task. But her eyes, they lingered on me for a few more seconds. And in that look, there was more than concern. There was something between recognition and longing, as if, for a brief moment, she saw in me the reflection of a freedom she had once wanted, but had had to abandon. The moment passed, and my mother went back to chopping onions as if nothing had happened. The sound of the knife hitting the cutting board mingled with the strong scent of spices, and I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that it was just that, a moment. But that night, the fear returned with a vengeance. I checked the door lock 3 times before sitting down. I pushed a chair against it, just in case. My heart beat in time with the silence of the house. The room was plunged into darkness, and I was back under the covers, my cell phone's glow almost off, the pages of the gospel open in my trembling hands. In those days, Yasmin had become my anchor. We saw each other almost every day at university, and even without speaking directly about what was going on inside me, she knew. Her wisdom was made of subtleties, questions that didn't press, words that gently nudged me toward the truth. One afternoon, as we shared a shawarma in the cafeteria, she looked at me and asked, "What have you been reading lately?" I looked at the plate, wondering how much I could say. "Things that make me question everything," I replied, choosing each word as if walking on glass. Yasmin smiled, with that calm that seemed to come from within her. The deepest truths are like that. First they hurt, then they free. And she was right. I was growing, but that growth hurt like the birth of something new. It hurt because it required leaving behind what had once given me security. It hurt because it pushed me out of what I called home. Over time, I began to ask questions that would have previously seemed unthinkable. In class, I raised my hand more courageously. I questioned interpretations, challenged pre-written answers. I sought nuances in stories and ancient texts. One day, after class ended, Professor Layla Aljasan called me. "Samira, your analyses are more in-depth. It's as if you're seeing everything through different eyes. What's changed?" I thought about telling the truth, that I had discovered a God who didn't ask me to be afraid, but to be sincere. who now saw the world as a book that had finally opened. But I couldn't. I just smiled and replied, "I think I'm learning to read between the lines, doctor." And that was it. I was learning to read between the lines of my own life, to decipher the messages fear had made me ignore for years, to recognize the prisons I called safety, the cages I mistook for home. Sometimes I think maybe you have yours too. The prisons that feel like shelter, but are only there because you've grown accustomed to the weight of the bars. If there's something in your life that requires courage to change, know this. Faith begins right there, when fear and love meet. I learned to live like a fugitive in my own home. I created codes, strategies, and routines to protect my secret. I always left a random book open on the table in case someone suddenly entered. I knew everyone's sleeping schedule, the creaks in the floor, the sounds that betrayed movement. I became an expert at disappearing without leaving my spot. But as the days passed, the tension grew. Living between two worlds was tearing me apart. One part of me was bound by tradition, by the image of the perfect daughter. The other was being pulled by a gentle, irresistible force that called my name. That December night, after reading the Sermon on the Mount for the third time, I closed the gospel and burst into tears. I wept for the beauty of the words. I wept for the fear of losing everything if someone found out. I wept for the loneliness of guarding a faith born in secret. And there, between muffled sobs and sheets that smelled of roses and salt, I did something I had never really done. Not a recitation, a prayer. Simple, raw, true. I whispered, "God, if what I'm finding is a lie, push me away. But if it's true, then don't let me escape." And it was there, in that locked room, that for the first time I didn't feel alone. That night, I reached my breaking point. I sat on the edge of my bed, my heart pounding, and finally blurted out the words I'd been holding back for months. "If you are real, if all this is true, then show me what to do, because I can't live like this anymore." There was no audible response, no sign, no sudden wind, no miracle that tore through the silence of my room, only the sound of my heart beating fast and the echo of my own voice. But somehow, something shifted inside me. That prayer, simple, desperate, sincere, had been prayed, and prayers like that always leave their mark, even when they seem unheard. I didn't know it, but God was already answering. Only He would do it in a way I could never have predicted. The answer would come in the form of shock, of exposure, of pain, because secrets can survive for a time in the dark. But light, once it enters, doesn't stop until it reaches every hidden corner. And I had already let the light in, even if I didn't yet know the price. It was a Tuesday in January. The sun streamed through my bedroom window, painting the floor with golden rectangles. He'd returned from university early because one of the professors was absent. I greeted my mother in the kitchen and absent-mindedly walked upstairs, repeating my usual routine. I left my backpack on the bed and went to the bathroom for just a few minutes. 5, maybe. 5 minutes that changed the course of my life. When I came back, my heart stopped. My father stood beside the bed, holding my backpack open. On the table, the gospel, still wrapped in its blue cloth, lay exposed, like a confession in broad daylight. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. His eyes met mine, and there wasn't just anger. There was pain. There was disbelief. There was the wound of a man who had seen, before him, his own daughter become the very thing he most condemned. The calm expression I knew faded. He trembled. The veins in his neck stood out. "What book is that?" he asked, his voice low, firm, almost threatening. I couldn't answer. My throat was dry. My legs were weak. He took a step forward, then another, and suddenly, the dull thud of his backpack hitting the floor shattered the silence. "I asked you a question, Samira," he shouted. His voice echoed through the house. I'm sure my mother heard it. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. I just mumbled, "It's just a book." He slammed his hand on the table so hard that the gospel jumped. "Don't take me for a fool. I know what this is. I want to know how the daughter of an imam had the courage to bring this blasphemy into my house." The word blasphemy cut the air like a blade. To him, it was trash. For me, it was life. It was the book that had set me free, that had taught me about a love without fear, without bargains, without masks. And there, before him, I realized that what was breaking wasn't just the trust between father and daughter. It was the entire wall that held up my old life. It wasn't fear that kept me from speaking, nor pride. It was hope, the naive hope that somehow he might understand. But the words escaped before I could stop them. "It's not trash. It's the truth. The The silence that followed was more violent than any scream. My father stared at me as if I'd just confessed to a crime. The color drained from his face, leaving something cold and pitiless. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and sharp. "Repeat that," but I couldn't. The courage that had sustained me for a moment dissolved in the heavy air of the room. I looked at the floor, trying to hold back the tears. He moved closer, so close that I smelled the familiar scent of sandalwood cologne mixed with sweat and anger. "You have been deceived," he whispered. "You are a traitor." Those words pierced my soul like blades. You betrayed your family. You betrayed your faith. You betrayed the name you bear. "Dad, Get out." His scream made me back away until my back touched the wall. "You are no longer my daughter. A daughter of mine would never bring the shame of hell into this house." He picked up the gospel with 2 fingers, as if the touch of that book contaminated him. He stared at the blue cover for a moment, and then looked at me with the same disgust. It was then that I realized. To him, that book and I were the same thing. A threat, a stain, something to be eliminated. "I'll give you one last chance," he said, now with the calm, authoritative tone of his Friday sermons. "You will renounce this lie. You will burn this book before me and ask Allah for forgiveness for the blasphemy you committed." His words echoed within me, each one weighing more heavily than the last. He was asking me to deny everything that had become real, to snuff out the only glimmer of light I'd found in a lifetime of shadows. I shook my head. "I can't." My voice was shaky but firm. He looked at me as if he had heard the final sentence. "Then may God have mercy on your soul," he murmured. "Because I won't." He left, carrying the gospel in his hands. I heard his footsteps echoing down the stairs, the muffled voices in the living room, my mother asking, him answering, each word like a knife wound I couldn't understand. Then, silence. A silence that weighed heavily. A few minutes later, his footsteps returned, slow, determined. When the doorknob turned, he had a padlock in his hands. He said nothing as he secured it to the outside of the door. The metallic click of the lock sounded like a sentence. Then he opened the door just enough to look me in the eyes once more. "You'll stay here until you come to your senses. No phone, no computer, no contact with anyone. You'll think about what you did. When you're ready to give up this madness, let me know." He held out his hand. I knew what he wanted. With trembling hands, I took my cell phone from my pocket and handed it over. It was my last link to the world, to Yasmin, to freedom, to the faith that was beginning to blossom. He took it silently, looked at me one last time, and before leaving, he simply said, "If you don't change your mind, may Allah judge you." The door closed, and the sound of the padlock echoed inside me like the beginning of a prison, not just physical, but spiritual. His voice wavered for a moment. For the first time, I heard something that felt like pain, a crack in the wall of fury. "I'd rather see you dead than live in shame." It didn't sound like a shout, but like a cold sentence, filled with something beyond words. A veiled threat, yet clear enough to leave no doubt. In Saudi Arabia, these things weren't distant stories. They were realities, silent, hidden, justified by the very honor he now claimed to protect. The door slammed shut, and the sound of the lock sounded like a final verdict. I stood there, leaning against the cold wood, as the floor seemed to disappear beneath me. The tears I had been holding back finally fell, silently, heavy as the weight of what I had lost. I cried because of the disappointment, because of the certainty that my father's love always had conditions. I cried with fear, knowing what he was capable of, and I cried for the death of the life I knew. My room, once my refuge, was now a cell. The windows were sealed with duct tape, leaving only narrow slits through which light filtered in, timidly, almost asking for permission. Outside, the city followed the same rhythm. The prayers at the mosque, the distant sound of cars, the unchanged routine of a world that completely ignored that. Behind that locked door, a 19-year-old girl had lost everything for believing in a different kind of love. That night, I didn't eat. Nobody went up. I just heard, down below, my father's firm voice leading the prayer as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed, and I knew that after that day, there was no going back. Time lost its meaning. With no watch, no cell phone, no open windows, I only knew that the day passed by the 5 calls of the mosque: Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. They were the only anchors that kept me connected to reality. Food arrived once a day, pushed under the door. A simple dish, rice, sometimes a piece of chicken, and a glass of water. I knew it was my mother who placed the tray. He recognized the sound of light footsteps, the silent care, but she never spoke. She never responded when I whispered, "Mom?" That silence hurt more than hunger. It was the kind of silence that doesn't bring peace. It was the silence of punishment, designed to break the will. As the days passed, the room began to become too small for my thoughts. I knew every detail by heart, the cracks in the ceiling, the damp patches, the uneven lines in the floor. To keep from going crazy, I started counting. I counted the tiles, 142. Then I counted my breaths, my heartbeat. But time, even though it was counted, remained still. I don't know if it was the third or fourth day when I started talking to myself. First, whispers. Then, entire conversations with no one. He talked about the future, about the day he would leave there, about meeting Yasmin again. I imagined her smile, her tight hug, the sound of her voice saying, "You are not alone." Those imaginary conversations became my way of surviving. It was the little hope I had left. And without knowing it, it was also the voice of God keeping me alive, even when the whole world had decided to silence me. The fantasies that kept me alive began to turn against me. The more I imagined freedom, the crueler the prison became. One afternoon, or maybe it was night, I couldn't tell, I heard voices downstairs. My father was talking to someone, an older man with a deep, firm voice. I lay down on the floor and pressed my ear against the cold tile, trying to make out what they were saying. The words were broken, but one sentence reached me, clear and cutting. A dishonor to the family must be corrected, or eliminated. That last word cut through the air. Eliminated. I felt the blood drain from my body. It was like hearing my death sentence being pronounced. I backed away trembling and huddled in a corner, hugging my knees, trying to contain the panic that rose like fire. For the first time since it all began, I understood that my father could truly deliver on his promises. Night fell. I knew because the final call to prayer echoed from the mosque. Then silence. A silence so absolute, I could hear the sound of my heart beating inside my head. Fear began to grow. Not just the physical fear of dying, but something deeper. The fear of having believed in something beautiful and having it cost me everything. The fear of having been foolish. The fear of being completely alone, even before God. I dragged myself to the center of the room and fell to my knees. My hands shook uncontrollably. The tears began to fall. Hot, salty, relentless. "Lord, where are you?" I whispered into the darkness. "I believed in you. I believed in your words. I believed that your love was true. But where is your care now? I am locked away, forgotten, and the very man who should protect me wants to erase me from life." The words came out between sobs, broken by pain. "Is this what the Lord promises to those who follow you? Abandonment?" The crying turned into moaning. All the strength I thought I had dissolved there, facing the cold ground. I was no longer a rebel, nor brave. I was just a scared, broken girl begging for mercy. "I can't take it anymore," I murmured. "I'm not strong enough. If you're real, please save me. Do something." And it was there, at the depths of my despair, that something began to shift. There was no voice, no light, no immediate miracle, just a gentle, almost imperceptible peace that seeped through my tears. It was as if the silence itself had changed texture. For the first time, it felt not like punishment, but like presence. I was not alone. Hours later, or maybe the next day, I don't know, I heard a light knock at the door. "Samira," it was my mother's voice, whispered, trembling, "Get dressed." Quickly, I opened my eyes, stunned. The key turned in the lock, and she walked in, her face pale and her eyes teary. "There's no time. Your father went to the mosque. He'll do what he said." She thrust a scarf, a tunic, and a small backpack at me. Before I could speak, she continued, "A friend of mine will take you. Trust her." We descended in silence. The house, once a symbol of order, now seemed like a minefield. The woman waiting for me outside was named Layla. She motioned me into the car, covered me with bags and fabrics, and drove away. My heart was beating so fast I could barely breathe. Minutes later, the car slowed down. I heard men's voices. "Hospital. Family emergency. Police. It's urgent," Layla said, trying to sound calm. There was a pause that seemed to last for ages. Then a flashlight shone through the window, illuminating my face hidden beneath the cloth for a moment. I held my breath. "What's in those bags?" a voice asked. "Clothes for my mother," Layla replied without hesitation. She'll be hospitalized for several days. Another silence. Then the voice answered, "Go. May she recover soon." The car started moving again. I only took a breath when Layla whispered, "It's over. We're fine." I took a deep breath, the air burning my lungs. Every kilometer that left Riyadh behind seemed to bring me closer to something new. I didn't know what it was called. Maybe freedom, maybe faith, maybe just a new kind of danger. But for the first time in a long time, I felt, deep down, that God was leading me. The drive to Jeddah took 4 hours. 4 hours that felt like an eternity. I lay huddled on the floor of the car, my body numb, my heart racing between terror and a hope I barely dared harbor. Layla kept the radio on at a barely audible volume, traditional music playing as a cover for the silence that couldn't attract attention. When the car finally stopped, she turned to me and said softly, "We're here, but don't leave until I say it's safe." I heard the door open, footsteps retreating, muffled voices exchanging short words. Time seemed stretched, as if the air were too heavy to move. Then, after a few minutes that felt like hours, I heard his voice again. "Samira, you can leave now." I tried to stand, but my muscles protested. Every movement felt like someone coming back to life after a long time underwater. When I looked out the window, I saw a neighborhood I'd never seen before. Narrow streets, small, dingy houses, and the air thick with the damp, salty scent of the Red Sea. At the door of one of these houses, 3 people were waiting for us, 2 men and a woman. Their faces showed a mixture of caution and compassion. "Welcome," one of them said in Arabic. "You're safe now. We're friends of Yasmin." I got out of the car on shaky legs. Layla came over and hugged me tightly. A silent hug, full of goodbye. "That's all I can do," he murmured close to my ear. "Trust them. They help people like you." I grabbed her arm, desperate. "Are you going back to Riyadh?" She nodded. "I need to go back. My family is there, but don't worry about me. I know how to survive." We stared at each other for a moment, and that was all it took. She smiled sadly, got into her car, and disappeared down the dark road. I didn't know it would be the last time I saw her, but something inside me understood. And even without knowing it, Layla had given me the greatest gift anyone could give, freedom. The 3 strangers led me into the house. It was simple, with few furnishings, but everything was clean and tidy. The woman, with a firm gaze and a calm voice, led me to the basement, a small room with a mattress on the floor, folded blankets, and a dim lamp. "Rest," she said. "You're safe here. We'll talk tomorrow." I lay down on that unfamiliar mattress, surrounded by the smell of damp and cold concrete. Outside, the call of Fajr began to echo in the mosques of Jeddah. Dawn was tinging the sky, and with it came a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I was alive, and in some ways, that was a miracle in itself. Over the next few weeks, that basement became my refuge. It was small and damp, but for me it was a sanctuary, a place where no one could find me, where I could breathe without fear. The house above vibrated with the sounds of life, footsteps, voices, the clanking of dishes. With each noise, I was reminded that I was not alone. The next morning, the 3 introduced themselves. The oldest man was named Ahmed. He had a calm voice and eyes that carried the weariness of someone who had seen too much. His wife, Nadia, exuded a quiet strength, the kind of steadfastness that comes only from those who have been through fire and survived. The third was Omar, younger, impatient, with a restrained energy that betrayed purpose. They explained to me what they did. They weren't part of any organization, nor did they have a name. They were simply Christians who had chosen to risk their own safety to save others like me, men and women who discovered their faith in secret and therefore needed to disappear. It was there, in that simple basement of a forgotten house in Jeddah, that I understood what it truly meant to follow Christ. It was not a religion of rituals, but a faith that risked itself for love. During the weeks I spent hiding in that basement, I began to understand the depth of the network that had welcomed me. Ahmed, Nadia, and Omar weren't activists or cloaked heroes. They were just ordinary people who had decided not to remain silent in the face of others' pain. One afternoon, as we drank tea in silence, Ahmed said to me with a serene look, "We don't do this out of courage, Samira. We do it because one day we also had no choice. And when you know what it's like to have no options, you become the option for those who have no other." Those words stuck with me. They told me stories that simultaneously broke and rebuilt me. A 20-something man who was reported to the police by his own brother after confessing his faith. A mother who had to decide between following Jesus and keeping custody of her children, and chose her children, carrying her faith in silence for years. A university professor who lost everything, career, home, country, for daring to ask if there was a God who loved without fear. Nadia, in her soft voice, said to me one night, "Your story isn't unique, and that's what hurts the most. There are so many like you, Samira, so many who never made it out." In the days that followed, I met other refugees of faith. They came late at night, when the streets were already empty. A 17-year-old girl still trembling, whose father had found Christian messages on her cell phone. A former Imam, who, studying the scriptures out of curiosity, found in them the truth that transformed him, and now lived in hiding, like me. Each had the same gleam in their eyes, a mixture of pain and hope. We ate together, prayed in silence, and in the long hours of the early morning, shared stories. It was an unlikely communion, a family made of fragments, united not by blood, but by a shared thirst for spiritual freedom. But deep down, I knew that hiding place was only a respite, not a home. Time was working against me, and my father's name, well known and respected, would soon draw attention to my disappearance. It was Omar who brought the news that would change everything. "We have a contact," he said, descending the stairs with a tense expression. "A merchant ship leaves Jeddah for Sudan in 3 days. The captain is trustworthy. It's not a comfortable trip, but it's safe." My heart raced. Sudan, another country, another beginning. "And then?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We have brothers there who will help you apply for asylum. Maybe Europe, but it will take time." Europe. The word sounded almost like a prayer, distant, yet full of promise. A place where I could walk freely, unafraid to be who I was. "How much will it cost?" I asked, knowing I had nothing to offer. Ahmed smiled tenderly. "Nothing. It's already been paid for. Someone donated to cases like yours. You'll never know who it was, but your freedom is the result of the faith of someone who believed in you." Tears came before I could even hold them back. Amidst the persecution and darkness, there were people willing to be light. Over the next 2 days, Nadia prepared me for the journey. She gave me simple clothes, a new name on false documents, and detailed instructions on how to act, what to say, and how to disappear. Omar taught me alternative routes in case something went wrong. Ahmed only prayed with me on the last night. "The sea can be unpredictable," he said, taking my hands. "But the God who brought you here is greater than any storm. Never forget that." And so, when the night of departure finally arrived, I realized that my heart was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with faith. Omar drove me to the port in his old truck, carefully hiding me under a tarp among the cargo crates. The port of Jeddah at night resembled a strange maze. Giant containers stacked sky-high, metal cranes looming like shadowy skeletons, and that thick smell of salt, diesel, and fish that seemed to never leave the air. We stopped at a secluded pier, where the silence was broken only by the distant sound of waves and the rustle of the wind. Omar waved a flashlight, flashing it 3 times quickly. From the darkness, a figure emerged, a stout man with a gray beard and a sailor's cap. "Is that her?" he asked, his voice deep and piercing in an Egyptian accent. "Yes," Omar replied without hesitation. "Take good care of her." The captain assessed me from head to toe, with a hard, direct gaze. "Don't expect luxury, girl. You'll be staying in the cargo hold with other refugees. Keep your head down, stay out of trouble, and in 4 days you'll be in Port Sudan. Got it?" I nodded, unable to articulate a word. Omar hugged me quickly, tightly, as if he wanted to give me all the strength I needed. "May God be with you," she murmured. "When you get there, wherever you go, stay safe, and don't forget to tell your story. There are so many people who need to hear that escape is possible." I climbed a wooden staircase that creaked with every step, entering the ship that felt like a metal monster. The captain led me through narrow corridors, smelling of rust and salt water, to the hold, a dark, stuffy space deep within the vessel. There were other people there. I counted quickly. 8, maybe 9. People of different ages, tired and silent. Some slept wrapped in thin blankets. Others stared at me with eyes that had lost their capacity for wonder. There was a woman holding a baby in her arms, 2 young men who looked like brothers, and a whole family, father, mother, and 2 small children. "Find a place to stay," the captain ordered. "There's water and basic food in those containers over there. Bathroom? We take turns using that corner. We leave in an hour." and he disappeared, leaving us alone in that cramped space, lit only by a yellowish bulb hanging from the low ceiling. I sat in a corner, hugging my small backpack that held everything I owned. A change of clothes, the money Ahmed had given me, and, most precious of all, a small note Nadia had slipped into the backpack's outer pocket. I took the paper and read it slowly. No matter how dark the night, dawn always comes. Be strong, sister. Your story is just beginning. I kept the note carefully, like a treasure. Then the boat began to move, the engine purring softly, and I felt the gentle rocking as we left the dock, sailing toward the unknown. Inside the basement, some people crossed themselves, others closed their eyes and tried to connect with something greater. I clung to my backpack, trying not to think about what I was leaving behind. The first 2 days were the hardest. I was overcome by nausea, mixed with the strong smell of diesel, and the crowds crammed into that small space. The heat during the day was stifling, but at night it was cold, a cold that seemed to cut right to the soul. We slept little and ate even less, but there was a strange solidarity between us. In whispers, we exchanged stories, memories, and hopes. The woman with the baby was named Fatima. She was fleeing a marriage where her husband threatened to harm their young daughter. The 2 young men, brothers, were from Yemen, fleeing a war that was ravaging the entire country. The family traveling with us was from Syria, already in transit for years, always searching for a place where they could be free. On the 3rd night, a storm surprised us at sea. The ship shook violently, throwing us all around the hold. The baby's cries were constant. The children screamed in fright, and water began to seep through cracks in the metal, forming puddles on the floor. "We're going to sink," shouted one of the young Yemenis, desperation evident in his voice. But the Syrian woman, mother of a family, responded with a calm that seemed to defy the storm. "No, we survived this far so we wouldn't end up here. God didn't bring us this far to abandon us." She was right. The storm passed, and the sea became calm again. Late in the afternoon of the 4th day, the captain opened the hatch and announced loudly, "Port Sudan." In that moment, we weren't just crossing a geographic boundary. We were crossing an invisible milestone, a step that signified new life. We stepped onto the deck, legs shaking and hearts racing. The sun was so strong it seemed blinding after so many days in the darkness of the basement. On the horizon I saw solid ground. Sudan, Africa, a continent I barely knew, but which in that moment became the promise of a new life. As the ship approached the harbor, I stood there on the deck, watching the sunrise paint the sky with shades of pink and gold. The wind blew against my face, blowing my hair, and for the first time in months, I could breathe deeply without that lump in my chest. I had left behind everything I knew, my family, my name, my country, even my language. But I carried with me something no one could ever take away, the certainty of the truth that set me free. Stories like this rarely make the news. They're told in whispers, among people who know the truth is worth more than the comfort of silence. If you think more people need to hear this, share this story, and subscribe to this channel. The ship finally docked. One by one, we disembarked, and with each step on Sudanese soil, I felt the weight of Saudi Arabia lift from my shoulders. I was free, finally, gloriously free. Port Sudan greeted me with its humid heat, so different from the dry, biting heat of Saudi Arabia. The air carried the scent of the Red Sea, mixed with the strong smell of the fish market. The streets were alive and chaotic, with street vendors shouting, vintage cars honking incessantly, and a strange Arabic language with an accent I didn't recognize. At the port, a man was waiting for me. Ibrahim, a middle-aged Sudanese man, part of the same clandestine network that had helped me in Jeddah. He took me to a small, modest apartment in a nearly crumbling building. There I would stay for the next few weeks while my asylum papers were processed. "The process takes time," he explained as we climbed the creaking stairs. "Weeks, maybe months, but we have contacts at the European Embassy. Your case is strong. Religious persecution, direct threat from your family. They will accept you." The apartment was tiny, a single room with a mattress on the floor, a kitchen with barely any stove, and a shared bathroom in the hallway. But there was a window overlooking the street, and I could open it whenever I wanted. This simple freedom, this choice, brought tears to my eyes. The first few days in Sudan were difficult. Everything was new. Every sound startled me. Every knock on the door made me fear someone had found me. Ibrahim came to visit me from time to time, bringing food and updates on my progress. His visits were the anchor that kept me grounded, even when fear seemed to be swallowing me whole. She taught me how to navigate the city without attracting attention, which streets to avoid, what to say if someone asked where I came from. "Here, you're nobody," she said firmly. "And for now, that's the best you can be." The word nobody stuck to me like an invisible weight. I was no longer Samira, the daughter of the respected Imam. Now, I was just another face in the crowd of refugees, a number, a faded story, lost among so many others seeking safety in a world that seemed to want none of us. The weeks passed with an almost cruel slowness. I sat staring out the window, watching the lives that continued outside, families laughing, walking together, and a deep ache gripped my chest. I had chosen the truth over my family, but that didn't make the longing any less. One afternoon, Ibrahim arrived with news that shook me. "Your application has been approved," he said, wearily but smiling. "You're going to France. They'll grant you asylum. Your flight leaves in 2 weeks. France. Europe. The place I'd only dreamed of during those cold nights in the ship's hold. I should have jumped for joy, but deep down, I only felt a strange emptiness. Who would I be there? What awaited me? Ibrahim then became serious and continued. "We received information from Riyadh. Your father is looking for you. He used his contacts and offered rewards. He knows you left the country, but he doesn't know where you are. So, when you arrive in France, use the new name they gave you. Don't look for anyone from your past. Not even Layla." Layla's name cut through my soul. "Is she okay? Didn't they do anything to her?" I asked, fear in my chest. Ibrahim looked away. "We don't know exactly, but after her disappearance, there were interrogations. She's smart and knows how to protect herself." Guilt crushed me. Layla had risked everything for me, and perhaps she was paying a heavy price for it. My freedom came at a cost, but I wasn't the only one paying. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Every day, I woke with the same question pounding in my head. What about my family? My mother, who was never strong, but also never cruel. What was she thinking now? Did she hate me? Did she cry in secret? And my father, that man who taught me to read, who held me in his lap and told me stories. Did the man I knew still exist, buried under the rigidity of doctrine, honor, and fear? One day, I would see him again. But what would we say to each other? Finally, the day of the flight arrived. Ibrahim drove me to Khartoum Airport in an old, nearly falling apart taxi. He handed me an envelope with documents. My new passport, with a French name, letters of recommendation from humanitarian organizations, contacts in Paris. When you arrive, there will be people waiting for you. They will help you settle in, find work, learn the language. It won't be easy, but it will work out. We said goodbye at the airport gate. A man I barely knew had saved my life. "No need to thank me," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "Just live free, and when you can, help someone. That's how the world changes." The flight was long, with a layover in Cairo. I spent hours staring out the window, watching the desert turn into sea, the sea turn into mountains, and the mountains turn into green fields. Europe felt like a dream when the plane landed. Everything was so different. The clean streets, the green trees, the cool, humid air that felt like it pierced my skin. I looked out the airport window and felt as if I had crossed not only a continent but also time. It was another world, with rules, rhythms, and freedoms I only knew from books. In the arrivals area, a woman held a sign with my new name. Her name was Sophie, and she worked with an organization that helped refugees. She welcomed me with a calm smile and a kindness I hadn't seen in a long time. She took me to a small apartment on the outskirts of Paris, showed me how to use the heater, located the nearest market, and gave me warm clothes. The European winter was a reality for which my body, accustomed to the desert heat, was unprepared. "We start French classes tomorrow," she said, "and there's a community here, people who have been through the same thing. You're not alone." But that first night, inside that unfamiliar room, loneliness was what haunted me most. I had gained freedom, and with it, emptiness. I had lost my language, my culture, my family, my name. Everything that defined me was gone. I sat by the window and watched the lights of Paris twinkle in the distance. And it was there, with a heavy heart, that I said a simple prayer. "Lord, I made it. I'm free. But what now? Who am I without everything I lost?" I heard no answer, only the distant sound of the living city outside. Then a line from the gospel came to mind that I had never forgotten. I have come that they may have life, and have it more abundantly. Abundant life. In that moment, I realized that abundance didn't mean comfort, nor the absence of pain. It meant having a real life, even if imperfect, a life where I could breathe without fear. And that, despite all the longing, was more than I had ever had. I lay in that strange bed, under blankets that didn't smell like me, in a country whose language I barely understood, and yet I slept peacefully. For the first time, I was free. I discovered that freedom is a blessing, but also a responsibility, and that learning to live it would be my life's new calling. 3 years have passed since the night I escaped through my bedroom window in Riyadh. 3 years that feel like a lifetime. Today, I have a new name, a new beginning. I live in a small apartment, where the sound of rain is more common than the sound of sunshine, and I work in a cafe near the Eiffel Tower, serving tourists from all over the world. I learned French, though my dreams are still in Arabic. I found a Christian community that welcomed me without question, that showed me that family isn't just blood, it's shared love, shared faith, and common hope. Still, there are nights when I stand at the window, watching the city lights and thinking about my father. I wonder if he ever repented, if one day, alone in his office, he opened the gospel he took from my backpack and read a single page. I wonder if my mother weeps for me in silence, if Layla managed to protect herself, if Yasmin knows how much her courage changed the course of my life. I pray for all of them, especially my father, because if God was able to free me from the fear that held me captive for so many years, he is also able to free the heart of the one who tried to erase me. Forgiving is not forgetting. It is choosing to no longer carry the poison that destroys us inside. And it is in this choice, every day, that I continue to live the freedom that Christ gave me. They call us refugees of faith, people who left everything to follow a truth that the world often refuses to accept. Each of us has a different story, but they all intersect at the same point. The price of choosing light over darkness, truth over convenience. It took me a while to understand, but today I know that my story isn't just mine. It belongs to all those who have ever felt torn between love for their family and fidelity to their own conscience. It's the story of girls who read books hidden under their blankets, of children who discover that true love doesn't require us to betray who we are, and of people who understood that following the truth can cost everything, but living without it costs even more. If you're listening to this and feel like the truth is costing you dearly, I want to tell you something from the bottom of my heart. It is worth it. Yes, the price is high, but the alternative is to live imprisoned in a lie. And that costs your soul, your peace, and the ability to look yourself in the mirror with dignity. So I ask you, in what area of your life have you chosen comfort over truth? And if you know someone who is going through a similar desert, someone struggling to hold on to what they believe in, don't leave him alone. Sometimes a word, a hug, a prayer can be the thread of hope that separates someone from giving up. I only survived because there were people like that. Yasmin, Layla, Ahmed, Nadia. Ordinary people who decided my freedom was worth the risk. They taught me that when we reach out to others, God reaches out to us. If this story touched your heart, pray for someone today. Because right now, as you hear this, there could be a girl in Riyadh, Tehran, or anywhere in the world, locked in her room, holding a forbidden book, wondering if she'll have the courage to follow the truth. Your prayer can be the invisible force that sustains this life. Thank you for listening to me this far. If this story resonated with you, please share it, not for my sake, but because there are hearts that need to know that freedom is possible. This is how hope spreads, from heart to heart, from story to story, from faith to faith. My name is different today, but inside me still lives that girl who read in secret, who cried in the hold of a ship, who trembled in the darkness of a basement in Jeddah, and who, even so, chose to believe. Every morning I wake up without fear is how I honor her. It's my way of saying to her, we did it. It was worth it. We are free. And if today you are in the midst of your own storm, trapped in your room, in your desert, in your silence, listen carefully. You are not alone. You never were. The same voice that sustained me through my darkest night still speaks today, saying, do not be afraid. I am with you. Believe, because it's true, and the truth always sets us free.